So it looks like there's a few people jumping on the call here, and just want to kick things off. Like we said, we're going to record this so we can put this out there to anyone and everyone after the fact, and just communicate all the COVID-19 related issues and topics. And I think this is really, I want to thank Jim Davis for reaching out to me on this, because I think, when we first started talking about what our statement and what our materials were going to be related to COVID-19, it seemed like it was such a big, it was so much bigger than strength and conditioning, and it's hard to really pinpoint exactly what a good targeted response is for a global pandemic. So this came together really quickly, but I'm really excited about it because we need engagement in our field, and we need to be the voice in our institutions for safe practices for our athletes. And this is just an opportunity where we can step up and serve in that role. So today I'm going to introduce Joel Chapman. He's our Illinois State Director for the NSCA, and he's going to start things off for us. And then we're going to go through our speaker lineup, which is Jim Davis, Dale Grooms, and myself. And then we're going to open it up afterwards to some Q&A. I know this isn't a Zoom webinar format; it's just a meeting. I personally like seeing the 100 faces in front of me and the head nods and the interaction. And so, just out of respect, and keep your mics muted and chime in on the chat if you have something, and I'll help moderate that depending on the size of the group that joins us today. But just want to thank everyone for being here, and I'm going to turn it over to Joel.
All right, thanks, Eric. The NSCA is around to support its members as well as the strength and conditioning and fitness professional industry. Here in Illinois now, we've got something coming up in a day or two where we're moving to phase 3. And I just happened to see today some of the bullet points of what's going to happen in phase 3 for the fitness facilities. And it's things like, by appointment only, and you have to have 10 feet in between people that are exercising. So these are new things that are just coming at us right now. So I'm glad that we can assemble here and talk about this and share our knowledge. I put a couple of resources or links to some resources in the chat box there. The first one has the first link. It's a web page that the NSCA has, and the first resource on there came out like maybe not even a month ago, and it's called the NSCA COVID-19 Task Force Return to Play. And as soon as that came out, I downloaded it. It's a brief, maybe it's like 2 or 3 pages, but this is a guideline that we can use when we open up our facilities. Now, I work at a community college, so I'm in an education setting. And I've got bosses that aren't necessarily in the strength and conditioning and fitness profession. So sometimes what I take for granted, what I take as common knowledge, I have to, oversimplify and explain to the higher ups so that they can understand and they know where we're coming from. So this resource that came out is really good, and it got me thinking. I emailed it to my employees, and it's something that when my boss says, hey, what do we need to do to open up, I can send it off and say, this is what we have to do. So that's a great resource. Also on that page, there are a couple of other links there that from pre-existing documents. And yeah, I see Mandy has on there a link I'm referring to. Yep. And one of them is the guidelines to safe return to training. And another one is just a facility safety checklist. And again, these are great resources that you can use. You can download them, take a look at them, use them as your own. What I like about these, again, is when I go to my boss in a different setting, in a education setting, not a fitness setting, and I can say these are best practices. I benchmarked this with other facilities. They like to hear those things, and that right away can justify a lot of things that you're doing when they hear those words and they know that you've kind of taken the time to go through and dot the I's and cross the T's. And then the last, that second link I put in the chat box, that one is to the NSCAA Strength and Conditioning Professional Standards and Guidelines. This is a thing that I refer to all the time. It has everything in there as far as standards that we in the fitness profession should be looking at and adhering to. So anything from square footage, how far apart the barbells should be, how far apart the squat racks are, temperature, humidity, everything. This is a source where you can go to and refer to it. And again, I've used this many times in my career with my bosses to say, hey, this is why we should only have classes of 14 back in the free weight area, because we have 1,400 square feet, so 100 square feet per student. So these are resources that I think are really helpful for everyone, and they're right out there, right on the internet, on the NSCA website. Other than that, I'm going to act as a resource and kind of a conduit to the national office at the NSCA. So if you have any questions, I'll put my email in the chat box in a minute, and you can send me an email or something if you have questions about the NSCA and things that we're doing in Illinois for professional development. With that, I guess I'm going to turn it over to Jim now.
Perfect. Thanks, Joel.
Thank you, Joel. Awesome. First of all, this is so crazy exciting for me. Look at all these squares of smiling faces. This is great. So thank you all for being here. I think it's just an incredibly exciting time at the back end of these really unique, hopefully once in a lifetime, 2.5 months. I could not be more pumped to get moving. And Joel, I think you hit it on the head. The way that I see sort of the opportunity ahead of us is this. Organizations, schools, whatever size they might be. I just happen to be one, and as well as Dale, and I see Brent and some others that are 3,000-4,000 plus. We can envision perhaps a school as like an aircraft carrier, like a big, massive, powerful entity that is capable of incredible things. But if you want it to take a left turn, it's going to take a while. It doesn't have the capacity to turn on the dime. I see our opportunity within this, kind of like Joel was alluding to be the ones that can go fast, that can turn quick and investigate and essentially have the path already mapped out for people. So when we decide it's time to move, it's boots on the ground going. There's traction underneath us. We're not discovering as we go. We are prepped and ready. And that's what's exciting to me. I think one thing that's been really important to me in the circles that I've been around and the people I've been talking to is there is probably a three-pronged conceptual approach to this. The first is very clearly, what is your institutional goal? If we don't identify, and it sounds obvious enough, but if we don't identify what our goals are, it's really difficult to navigate the ambiguity of the moment and map our behaviors onto those goals. So to identify what it is we want as an institution within an athletic department, and then within the strength and conditioning arm of an athletic department, perhaps, at least the starting point, to be able to name it allows us then to map our behavior onto it. So that's sort of step one. Step two, and this is more true now than ever, is we have to identify what level of risk we are willing to shoulder in order to accomplish those goals. And that's something that I was on a call on Sunday, and a gentleman spoke up who had, Nate, he was in the service at one point, and essentially said that you cannot encounter something unpredictable unless you have that kind of in mind. It was a really interesting way to think about it, and I'm certainly not comparing what we're doing to service, but that mindset was a really interesting one. What sort of level of risk are we willing to incur in pursuit of our goals? So I think at our place, just for sharing out, we're going to have as much rigor as we've ever had. We're going to, it's going to be smaller groups. It's going to be all the things that Dale's about to talk about, all the things that Eric and all the research put out, but it's going to look a little different. But we got to be ready to move. I think in the last part of that, the third prong is you got to go fast to go slow. So once you have those two concepts in mind, I think we got to be able to turn this fast. I know a lot of people. Here's what I think: if we were to only follow what is the 50-30-20-10 concept that's outlined in the NSCA CSCCA joint statement for return after inactivity, if we were to only follow that guideline, it'll be a month before we're operating at full steam, right? And my, I guess, fear, part of my fear and the inspiration to reach out to you, Eric, and some others was what I don't want is to get to the back end of June or July and we put the pedal down trying to make up for lost time. And we because we went slow getting back with the athletes, we weren't, we've lost the ability then to go slow in our reacclimation, if that makes sense. We've lost the buffer. It's time to go. We're a month, we're 6 weeks out from fall competition. So I guess those are some of the key points that I'm both excited about. Well, forget it. No, there's no but there. I'm just freaking excited about it. And I think the caution, I will try not to speak out of my wheelhouse. So I will lean on experts like Dale Grooms to really highlight where perhaps the caution should be. And I'm going to very quickly here. So Dale, for those who don't know him, he's the head athletic trainer at New Trier. He started at Maine West, came over to New Trier about 20 years ago. He's been serving at, students in the athletic training profession for 27 years. He's won a bunch of national and recognition, including the NATA Service Award, IATA Dedicated Service Award, a lot of service, and of the year in this guy's bio. He is an all-star. He's elite in his field. I've learned a lot from him, and I'm happy to work with him. And I think he's going to be an important resource for us today. So, Dale Grooms.
Thank you, Jim, for those very kind words. I've learned a lot from Jim as well, and Jim and I go way back to when he was actually an athlete when I was at New Trier. I think I came his senior year, if I recall correctly. So it's a pleasure to be not only see him as an athlete, but now work alongside him. I tried to break this up into four different areas that you guys need to be cognizant of. There's going to be different guidelines that are going to be coming out right away. I mean, you'll see different people coming up with different, you should do this, you should do that. This is what's kind of put out by the National Federation of High School Associations. This is going on with our team docs. So there's a lot of different talk about what we should and shouldn't do. This is what I'm going to try and do everything I can to give you guys as much information to prevent your athletes from getting the COVID or the athletes giving you COVID. Looking through some of these pictures, you've got some gray bearded guys like myself, although I'm completely hidden because I shave mine all off. But the reality is these college and high school kids don't necessarily show a lot of these different symptoms out there, but we need to make sure that we're giving the optics that we are trying to keep them safe as well as you safe and anyone else who's working with them. You do not want to be responsible for spreading this to anyone, because think about it. If one of these kids gets it from another kid and they spread it to home and it keeps on spreading to grandma and grandpa and they pass away, we're going to all feel horrible. Now, at the same time, we're never going to get to a point where we can say we have a zero transmission ability. It's just a risk that we're going to have out there. It's going to be a risk that we're taking on as we're working with these young men and women. At the same time, it's these young men and women are taking on that risk of bringing this illness home. So how do we exercise and reduce some of this? Well, we got to stick with science and not the myths. Most kids, as I said, will not show, but some kids have had this. And so we have to worry about what some of these kids might be dealing with. The National Federation is tossing around whether or not kids need physicals. I would say right now we might need physicals more than ever because of what happens with some of these young men and women is their scar tissue that when they get it, they get scar tissues in their lungs. They actually get cardiac scar tissue. So there's a lot of things where I think this is actually more important for these young men and women to get the physical probably than they ever have before in the past. So really, we got to make sure that we're making sure that these young men and women are taken care of just from that whole inflammatory effect of the disease. There's a lot that we know, and there's a ton that we don't know. And as I said, it's going to keep on changing. Now, one of the things you guys are going to have to do is you're going to have to check your athletes in, and you're going to have to create pods of these athletes. Now, right now, Illinois is allowing for groups of 10 to occur. With those, you want to keep that pod the same all the time. You do not want people coming in and out of those pods. Reason being is if Jimmy comes in one day and then Bob comes in the next and Susie comes in another day, now if someone has it, it's going to be harder to try and keep this COVID transmission down, and you can't track it well. So maybe one day everyone's going to be there for 10, maybe another day you're going to have 8. That's okay. We just got to keep those pods the same, so this way we can track everything and keep everybody as safe as possible. You know, you're gonna have to, even though most of these kids will not show symptoms, you should check temperatures, okay? Now, what is the magic temperature? 100.4. That is considered the temperature to send them home. Anything less, it could be, they're saying that could be anything. That could be, maybe they just ran into practice, running from the car, or ran from home, or biked in, and they got all overheated. So right now, the magic temperature is 100.4, they go home. I also gave I sent Jim a Excel document that has a series of questions on there that you should probably go over probably at least once a week with them. Some people will say every day, but if it's the same group constantly, I don't think you need to keep on changing it. No, keep on asking them every day. Also want to try and speed up that check-in process. And it's important. If any one of those questions they answer yes to, they shouldn't be with you guys just because they have high probability of transmission and spreading to everybody else. You know, the crazy thing is, yes, I think every athlete should be wearing masks, okay? This not only protects you as the person out there working with them, it also protects the athletes in between. Now, what type of mask is a lot of questions I've gotten. To me, I like the neck scarf mask, kind of goes from here to here. One of the things I really like about those are very thin, so it's easy to breathe out of. Runners have been using them for ages, more so in the winter, but they have that summer variety that still does a very thin process. It does a very good job of reducing the respiratory droplets from coming out. It doesn't do a phenomenal job. But, I mean, and speaking of the droplets, one of the things we got to think about is, you know, why we want the masks, okay? The studies out there show that it's the respiratory droplets that are transmitting this disease. They actually have a study out where a woman from China came in from Germany, was at a restaurant. She literally just reached behind and asked the people for like the salt. Those people got COVID. It's that easy to spread, you know, and there's a whole bunch of people in there. They actually were able to biomark all the way down to this one woman, how it transferred to all these different people in the restaurant. Now, the beautiful thing that we also just recently learned is that the hard surfaces do not transfer this virus very well. So that's going to be a really important thing. Also, before they begin, let's see. Now, the other thing you also have to remember, when these young men and women are wearing these masks, it's almost like altitude training. Like pretend that you're actually, all of a sudden you've gone from Florida, now you're all the way up in Denver. You've got to think about that. Got to allow those young men and women to, again, to acclimate to this strain of breathing a little bit more, okay? Acclimatization is going to be really big. And finally, I would suggest your athletes to wash their hands all the way up to their elbows prior to exercising. Reason why? How many times do you guys gotta go like this as you're exercising and sweating? I know I do a lot. So it's a way to, again, to try and wash everything prior off, to hopefully, again, transfer as little as possible. And then I would wash again afterwards, again, trying to make sure these young men and women stay healthy. Spacing, 6 feet apart, simple. Progress slowly. Reason being, a lot of these young men and women, if they've been doing stuff, maybe they've just been going back and forth. We need to work on a lot of lateral motion for these young men and women to stabilize those hips. The physicians are terrified of ACLs coming this fall. They are absolutely terrified about the number of ACLs because kids have been locked up and not doing a whole lot. So hip stability, water. That's going to be a crazy one. They've got to bring their own water bottle. Now, the hard part is, how do they refill their water bottles out when they're out there? There's different guidelines out there, and none of them are really well because they're saying don't use sinks, don't use water fountains. To me, if you can, they say don't use the water cows. To me, I think the water cows, as long as they're running constantly, gives you a very low probability of kids transferring the virus to one another. Post, again, wash again. Wash, clean. Hygiene is huge. With being outside, it's going to be so much better than inside. Once you guys get inside, that's a whole new beast. The studies are showing when you're inside, the transfer rate goes up a lot, significantly higher. Sports that I'm really nervous about for the fall are actually our volleyball teams. I'm actually really anxious about them because of the transfer rate. You know, when you're outside, you got the UV rays that help kill things. So really quickly, I didn't want to go too long. Hopefully I didn't go too long. I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. And I believe I turn this over to Eric now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. A lot of great info there. And I think it's always great. You know, I always had this perspective working in baseball, and I don't think it holds true in every aspect of the field, but in baseball strength and conditioning at the professional level, a lot of our jobs became full-time simply because the athletic trainers were being asked to do so much. And strength and conditioning made its way into the game that way. So I think the relationship between athletic training and strength and conditioning really is important. And I always kept that in mind during my baseball career. And I know at the college level, it's important as well. So, my goal here today, and a lot of this has been touched on, but I wanted to go into a little more detail on current guidelines that we have out there, some of the papers that Joel mentioned, and just to discuss in a little more detail and make sure that people know where to look for the information, because what you'll see is there's so many documents out there right now, and we are combing through it and trying to find the right guideline to apply in our situation. And I'm going to try to sort through that for you here today. At all of our state events, we share this type of info, and on our webpage, nsca.com, we have a red bar at the top, and the update section leads you to a page that basically gives you any NSCA answer that you need related to COVID. We've spent a lot of time internally trying to vet these materials, and everything from upcoming exam schedules to CPI member insurance coverage related to COVID-19. These are questions. Some we've been asked a lot, and some not so much. But we really are making a great effort to be as prepared as possible for this. And some of the key materials that came from this came from the NSCA COVID-19 Return to Training Task Force, a group that came together. It was the second half of April, and it started as a bunch of bullet points that were getting put out there in our special interest groups. And Mike Caro, I credit Mike Caro, the head of our college special interest group, and he's like, we really need to turn this into something. And so it really just started a conversation, and we got as many experts in a short period of time as we could to put a very concise, meaningful document together. And that's what Joel was referring to. And so these are sort of the bullet points of what we were trying to address with that document. We have athletes coming back with condensed preseason schedules. We're worried about extreme deconditioning, and not just everybody universally on the same page. You're going to have varied conditioning levels from athlete to athlete within a team setting. The risks of injury and overtraining, as Dale mentioned, the ACLs. I've seen some with the NFL lockout. I've seen some data related to Achilles tears back in 2011 after a period of time off. So there's a lot of information if we go back through the history of sport related to injury after periods of inactivity. And one of the key themes here is that the risks on our athletes is not exclusive to COVID-19. There's a lot of training and inactivity related guidelines that got integrated into this document. So it's really kind of a bridge document between these two concepts. And that was really one of the big goals. We're going to have athletes that gain or lose weight, and that wasn't the intended route. Interrupted rehab programs. Where are our athletes at coming back from Tommy John or whatever type of surgery that they had? And then tons of program and facility challenges, and that's where Illinois is at right now. This was an infographic that came out on that guidance paper, and it breaks it down into sort of schedules and management of team training sessions, risk factors related to inactivity, and then cleaning and sanitation. There's a lot of thought went into some of these recommendations and the wording of it, but the goal was to keep it broad so that it could be applied by certified professionals like yourselves in a meaningful way for your situation. I mean, we all know that there are facilities out there that, that are beautiful and have, sliding garage glass doors that go up and you can expand it and have open airflow, and this is going to be a breeze, literally. But there's also these dungeon weight rooms that we've kind of grown up in and it still exists that are going to be really tough to keep clean and really tough to be sanitary. And we need to really be critical of our situations right now, just from a health and safety standpoint for our athletes. And another theme is this isn't just about the athletes. We need to keep ourselves safe for the sake of our own health and our families, our kids, everyone involved. The coaches, the administrators, everybody on campus with us. These are huge concerns. So, so this document also brought in that 50-30-20-10 and the FIT rule, and just some of the language. I don't want to say modified that, but it really catered it specific to COVID-19 and in the situation we're facing now. So this is sort of a breakdown of that first resource, that guidance paper. And this is what you're going to go to that paper for: managing training schedules and facilities, safe practices for athletes and coaches. We suggested the 2-spotter technique just to avoid physical contact altogether. But in general, we shouldn't be having a huge need for spotters that first couple days back, right? Like, we should be kind of progressing athletes back into training gradually. So keep that in mind with the spotting recommendations. And as of today, I've seen one other recommendation related to spotting that's out there that was just basically use a mask if you're spotting someone. But I think it's going to be better if we avoid physical contact altogether. We have a printable checklist on this document. Some other areas, and some of these have come to life after the document got put out there. But the big thing is just the importance of warm-up, reestablishing movement patterns. We've kind of been stuck in our houses, and we're in our backyards, and we haven't been able to really stretch it out in a full sprint in a while. Or, basic running mechanics, mobility, movement. That's going to go a long way. Lauren Landau had a quote in that video that got posted the other day from the Broncos that basically said, our guys just need to get outside and move. And then there's a conditioning component to warming up every day. That, I always told my guys in baseball that, if we do a little 8 to 10 warm up every day over the course of 140, 162 games, that's going to be 24 hours of time over the course of a season. That adds up. That's significant. We can't take that for granted. So that's a huge thing right now. That's don't take your warm-up time for granted. That time is valuable. Traffic flow, movement through the sessions. You know, I've seen some layouts where from entrance to exit, you could create one-way traffic flow if that's realistic, or just movement from station to station so you don't have doubling back and excess crowding in certain areas, but also during transition times between groups, allowing some extra time there so your number of athletes doesn't double when two teams are present, or in the hallway outside, or in the parking lot as people are coming and going. Air quality is something that came up in some conversations with MLB. A lot of those weight rooms are underneath stadiums. There's no windows. There's, you know, while many are state of the art, some, you know, I'm thinking of Fenway Park. That's an old stadium that hasn't had a ton of renovations over the years. Ventilation, fresh air, sunlight, those are going to be very valuable in helping to rid the air of those respiratory droplets. And so if you have a facility that doesn't have that, there are some guidelines in the essentials text about fans per square footage that you could refer to and apply those guidelines. And maybe that's just the best you can do in some situations, but in other situations, using your facility and maximizing it to prevent the spread of COVID is going to be important. In general, the goal is to minimize exposure. So time spent, you want to be in and out. You don't want to, you know, a lot of the recommendations out there, get dressed, come to the gym, get your training done, and leave. Remove extra equipment, coaches, remove extra equipment. Basically, every piece of equipment on the floor is a cleaning surface. So if you're not going to use it, get rid of it. We'll put it in a closet somewhere, because that's one more thing you're going to have to stay on top of from a cleaning and sanitation standpoint. Athlete and coach responsibilities. Are athletes wiping equipment down? Is it the coach? Do you have interns? How are you staffing this? How are you involving your athletes? The athlete onboarding process. How is cleaning being discussed with them? Is it disposable wipes? Are we making sure we're not sharing towels and rags and things that can create? I'll credit my wife with this one, but using a clean hamper for clean towels versus the same hamper for both. I would have never thought of that if it wasn't for her. But in terms of training, going on to resource 2, that's the joint statement, the CSCCA, NSCA joint consensus guidelines. And so this is basically a 2 to 4 week training progression. My personal thought, and I think as any certified coach can do, you read these guidelines, there's 3 tracks here in this document for how to progress back. The one that trumps all in this situation to me is the prolonged inactivity. So 50-30-20-10 across the board is not a bad way to go, because it puts safety ahead of everything else. The purpose of this document was to establish safe upper training limits. This is an infographic that came out a couple of years ago. So this was a 2019 paper, so I guess it was last year. So 50-30-20-10, the FIT rule. In terms of my athletes and the way I would feel comfortable, I put everybody in category 3 to the right, 50-30-20-10. A lot of this document and the language in there revolves around conditioning tests. And that is something that our field has put a lot of focus on over the years, and it's something we really need to have an opinion on right now. And I'm not going to give that to you. I want you to think about what is appropriate for your situation. Every coach has a level of conditioning and preparation that they feel is necessary for their athletes to achieve. That might be a 300-yard shuttle time or 16 110s or any of those things. But there's also another approach of gradually building up athletes to where they need to be, so that your peak condition isn't that first day where you're just cramming hard for the test at the beginning of camp. And I think we need to be really smart about how we progress athletes back. And that 50-30-20-10 applies not only to drills, but it also applies to your daily conditioning. So if you have a set program in place, apply that 50-30-20-10, the fit rule. Err on the side of caution in terms of sessions per week, scheduling. If you're scheduling multiple teams, that might answer the question for you, because you're going to need to space it out a little bit more just to accomplish this. These are not tell you exactly how to do it documents. These are read it and apply it as best to your ability. And then the third one, the professional standards and guidelines. This definitely wasn't written for COVID-19, but there is a ton of information in here that applies. It's designed for safety and liability, limiting liability exposure. A lot of good square footage allowances for coach and athlete coach-to-athlete ratios in here. And what's interesting, when you see guidelines that are out there in the field right now, they are extremely close, like right on with what these documents were that came out in 2017, originally 2009 when it was published the first time. And I'll share that here. The square footage allowance in that paper is 100 square feet per participant. So that's on the high end for recommendations that are out there right now in terms of, you know, what you could accomplish with 6 foot social distancing. And I will share a slide with kind of taking it beyond 6 foot social distancing next. But it's, I think the highest number I've seen is 144 square feet. And that was a North Dakota government document that came out. And so that's on the high end, and it was 100 to 144. So these recommendations are very solid in terms of what's out there right now, in terms of square footage. Minimum professional to participant ratios, these are general. But what's interesting is the paper circles back, and then it says if you're using complex Olympic lifts, multi-joint free weight exercises, it should be lower. So it gave the example of 1 to 12. So it really ties in well with the we shouldn't be training more than 10 athletes at a time guidelines that are out there in a lot of areas right now, or 10 to 12, or keeping it low, because most of our strength and conditioning programs are going to be a little bit higher level than maybe the basic, you know, than what you could accomplish with a 1 to 20 coach to athlete ratio. So taking, you know, how do we apply social distancing to weight room settings? And this all comes out of the essentials text. You know, one square footage recommendation in there was 49 square feet to allow movement. So we've already taken it now. If 6 foot social distancing, or that 36 square foot mark, is what a person needs just in daily life, well, that already says that movement requires a little bit more space. Okay. Another term, and if you just took your CSCS, you probably remember it more than I do, but it is safety cushion, and that refers to space between equipment. And one interesting thing, so walkway space, 36 inches, and we do that for wheelchair access, and that was what's preached to you during the CSCS, but it expands in circuit training to 4 to 7 feet. So you have movement. When you have movement, it's built into these guidelines in the textbook that we need more space. And that is the general take home from this. So that 100 square feet per athlete, per person, that is based on allowing for movement. And so I thought it was important to show that the essentials text and some of these guidelines that have been in place for a number of years work really well with COVID and the recommendations that are out there. So I would feel comfortable bringing this to an athletic director or a leader at my school and using these and applying these guidelines. This is our link to our resource page. It's been shared a few times today. Just want to thank everyone who helped create these resources. And that's what I have. I'll leave this up for a second. I want to make sure everybody, you know, I don't know everyone on this call, but I feel it's important in this role that anyone, you know, this is your NSCA, this is your strength and conditioning community, and I want you to be able to reach out to me, whether it be email, that's a cell phone. So reach out to me if you have questions, concerns, if I can help you, or you just want to communicate with me and let me know what's going on. I want to have a good pulse on the field, whether you're just getting into the field and getting started, or you've been in this field for 20, 30 years and you have a lot of knowledge and you want to give back. So it means a lot to me, especially in this time where there's so many there's so many questions. We don't have all the answers, that we're together. And this meeting alone is powerful. And so, yeah, I'll stop talking, and I want to open it up to anyone who wants to chime in, but it does mean a lot to me. And I really appreciate everyone being here today, and Joel and everybody, and Dale and Jim for speaking and taking the time. So thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Eric. I wonder, just to maybe get the ball rolling, I got some text and chat questions that I might throw out to the field. Please, I hope everyone will be willing to chime in. I think a couple of these are aimed directly at you, Dale, but certainly anyone who's got insight, feel free. One was, how do you keep kids from going crazy? I assume that means kind of like putting the metaphorical pedal down right away. I think that's actually a really good question, and probably very thoughtful insight into the nature of adolescence. I was talking about this on the other day. Go fast to go slow. I think if we can embed that concept in our kids and say we don't want to wreck our fall in June, to develop a language around why this is important and really onboard thoughtful concepts is a good idea. One thing I know that we're going to do in our place is we are going to start from scratch with our culture. And what a great opportunity is to do that. If we can't put the hammer down training-wise, what a great time to readdress these components of our culture, whether that's embedding it in slightly longer rest times or whatever. But one of our theories is do it right, then do it fast. And whatever that might be, get the play right, then let's speed this thing up. Get the rep right, then let's add some intensity, whatever it is. So just from, I guess that's just our approach, but it does seem to be a cool time to double back down on one's culture as sort of a filler, and let people know that slow is good, thoughtful is good, safe and thoughtful. How's that? Now, that may not be that appealing to an adolescent, but there you are. And if anyone has anything to chime in on that, please feel free to. There are a couple other ones safety-wise that I'd like to share, if that's okay. John, I hope you're all right if I call you out on this. You got a lot of good stuff going on over there, up there from here. John asked two really good questions. Let me see. Okay, the screening, the temperature screening, is that something we shoulder as strength coaches? Is that an institutional thing? Is that something we are mandated to adopt in the summer? That's part one, so maybe I'll hand that to you, Dale.
So again, my whole thing is how do we protect you as the coach? As of right now, my guess is, if at least for the state of Illinois, we're going to hopefully be able to do things in pods of 10. That's going to fall on someone. I don't know who it's going to fall onto. I envision if Nutria starts doing it, it's going to fall out upon me and my staff. If it's just you guys out there, you guys probably should be trying to do something to make sure these temperatures are taken. I'm just telling you, it's really more of an optic than anything else, meaning this is just really trying to make sure, hey, we're trying to do our best to make sure no one is here sick and transferring the disease to anyone else. Like I said before, these young men and women, the probability of them showing signs and symptoms are very low, which is what makes them so dangerous. The other thing you guys gotta start teaching is like the old Michael Jordan, playing with the flu is gone, right? I mean, at least until we get the vaccine out there. So we have to start getting that mindset into these young men and women that, it's not practice at all costs anymore, because you are now playing life and death situations with your coaches, with your family members, with your grandparents. So we just got to be safe that way. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, I guess I was thinking I'd heard that before, but I was curious if I needed to be thinking about purchasing one of these temporal scanners. Is really, if I'm getting very specific, I didn't know if that was something that you as trainers, if there was something you recommended, because I'd heard that before, and then things have changed a little bit. So curious.
it's really going to be an institution decision. Like I just had a meeting today. We were talking about, again, like Jim was saying, our school is 4,000 kids. So that's a lot of kids to try to take a temperature of as kids are coming in. You can, you know, if you don't have the thermometers, I would at least do the questionnaire to ask those kids. You can say, hey, kids, families, we are expecting you to take a temperature at home to make sure you're not at this point at 100.4. That may be one way to do it. You have to kind of do a little bit of that honor system, and that's really important. Again, as I said, it's an optic. If you can do it, I would highly encourage you to do it.
Can I add on to that, Dale? I think that's really good point. It certainly is it's not like a government mandate. It's an institutional decision, and it's probably the right one. And what the survey Dale is mentioning, maybe if you can include your email in the chat before you leave, I'll bring a group email together, and I'll share both Eric's slides, the links to the resources, and the survey Dale is mentioning. I've also got another one from a group out in Ohio. It's very similar to yours, though, Dale. It's essentially, are you symptomatic? You said this could be like we're not trying to cure the disease, and there's all sorts of flaws in asking. Like you mentioned, kid may not present symptoms, but it actually, John, maps on, I think, pretty well to the other thing that Dale's mentioning, the pod situation. I think the approach that we're going to try to take, or the one that we're thinking about now, is map out the pods and essentially take attendance an hour before by essentially mandating the survey. So an hour before you arrive, we want to hear your we need to get the survey results, and we'll kind of check you in again when you arrive, just as a theory, just as one sort of doubling, tripling down on this thing. Once we get on grounds of the school, of course, it's Dale, it's his staff. Sorry, Dale.
That's what I get paid the small bucks for.
That's right. Yeah, but that is one way to do it. The other thing that was asked, Dale, I don't know if you have an opinion on this, is when we talk about cleaning the hard surfaces, do you have any recommendations regarding product? John, let's see if I can find the name of it. John, what was the name of the one that you mentioned?
I said we've used Virex before. We've had those gym wipes. I mean, we keep a lot of hand sanitizer around, but I was just curious if there's been things that you guys have been hearing or seeing that maybe you've liked. Sometimes you spray that stuff and you have to leave some time before somebody can be near it. But
So a lot of those are going to take about 3 minutes to actually kill everything that's on that surface. I believe, again, if you're spraying down the surface with one of these disinfectants and then using a paper towel to wipe it off, and that paper towel goes in the garbage, I think we're doing a really good job. Again, it's not really the hard surfaces that we're finding out that are transferring the disease. It's the respiratory droplets that are going in. I told Jim this analogy the other day. I didn't use it in my presentation right now. I mean, you think about with those water droplets from breathing, think about cigarette smoke. We can smell that stuff from 20 yards away. And guess what? That's coming out of someone's lungs. So this is why we want those masks to try and help protect everyone. It's kind of a way just kind of to get it in our minds about how far this stuff can transfer, especially indoors.
Yeah, totally right. And you know what I'm thinking is, I think, Eric, you mentioned it. It's all sort of, we're trying to do the next right thing, but there's no hard, fast science. For example, the 6 foot limitation, I mean, that's an invented rule, right? Like you could certainly project a sneeze more than 6 feet, hypothetically. It's base guidelines, and it does come down to risk mitigation. I think the theory is after 6 feet, the likelihood just goes down significantly. And like Dale said, I mean, and I think of Dale, that smoking one reminded me of, you go into a forest, you smell a pine tree from 100 yards away. Well, that's particulate in the air, and now it's in your respiratory system. So there's no hard, fast shutdown of transmission.
Now, one of the things you just mentioned, Jim, which I think was really important about that survey, Google Survey does a really neat job where you guys can actually send that survey out to the athletes like an hour before, and make that a mandate to be answered. And that goes right to their email. And if they email, they answer it right off their phone. Google Survey is a great tool. I didn't think about that. That's a brilliant idea and great job.
Thank you, sir. What do we think? Any questions out there?
I want to jump.
Somebody put a good question in the chat about these pods of kids, but you've got a coach that's going to be interacting with multiple pods potentially. So if somebody wanted to touch on that real quick.
So to me, again, it's you can have a coach, in my humble opinion, working with multiple pods. Okay. That coach, again, if there's to me, again, if you have these kids spaced out on a football field, you can field a lot of space of 10 pods, in my humble opinion, in an area and where a coach can actually be even a little bit more further distance. I know you coaches have field, so I think there's lots of ways to do that safely and masked.
Can I ask a question? Because I put that up. So in theory, what I was thinking was having a rotational style where like every 15 minutes, a group would, they have a warm-up station, a plyo station, a strength station, some type of conditioning station, and then get out. So just have this assembly line, enter here, right? Do the whole temperature check in the beginning as well, and then exit out. If we had a coach in each station and the kids just kind of filed through, do you think that is within the guidelines and is also best practice?
My short answer is going to be yes.
Yeah. I think so. I think, man, Dylan, whatever you say is what I'll agree with.
Because you look at the math.
We're marking that one down right now.
I'm just trying. It's more. It's called passing the buck. Is that what it's called? Yeah. I think I'll tell you one thing that we're going to try to do. Coach, you bring up a really good question. It's almost. I think we're going to have to expand our coaching expertise. This is just what we're going to try to do. So instead of being an expert at the plyo station, we're going to be experts at the day's workout, and just constantly be debriefing, pushing professional development so that we can reduce exposure. But I don't think it's mandatory. I think that's just what we're going to try in week 1.
Great, thank you.
But Dale, you think it probably wouldn't be terrible from a risk perspective?
Again, to me, if you're setting up those stations, you can even push that coach a little bit further back, which again would help prevent that spread even more. So I think if you're, that coach is like maybe, 20 feet back or something like that. I mean, I'm just throwing out arbitrary numbers. But I think that coach is pushed back a little bit further. You're even able to provide a great coaching position and instruction and still provide safety.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think those thinking through the guidelines that are out there in the professional guidelines paper is going to be there's a lot of that in there about it's typically 3 athletes to a rack in a standard as a max in standard situations. Obviously bringing that down and staffing it so that we're minimizing risk, accounting for spotting. How are we going to maneuver from the needs of the situation? Who's going to do the spotting, the athlete or the coach? Who do we have on hand to do that? Thinking about the facilities of these, the logistics of these things. One thing I wanted to touch on briefly from the screening that was coming up, and this has come up in a few conversations, was we're talking about daily screening. from a health standpoint, which is very important. But we have the opportunity to screen our athletes right now as they come back. What have you been doing during this time from a fitness standpoint? There's no document. This is kind of a call to action for this group. There's no 5-10 bullet point question that would go home. And I think this really works in the high school setting where parents are actually getting that letter and saying, hey, it says you're going to be starting to run here, and this is what the plan is. It's documented. You haven't been doing anything, so you better start doing something around the house before we start. Or just getting the parents on board in terms of signing off on where their sons and daughters are at. I think is very valuable in terms of screening our athletes beforehand from a conditioning level standpoint. So that was just something I wanted to throw in there that has come up in a few conversations.
Absolutely. And okay, thank you all for this, by the way. We're right at time. If anyone's got maybe one final question that we can answer quickly, we might have time for it. Otherwise, I really, really do encourage you all to add your email to the chat. I've been taking pictures, Eric, just in case you kick me off. But I'm sure we'll be able to collect all of this. I see you, Dale.
Question.
Yeah.
So Eric, you're talking about coaches and using the kids for spotting. What about the use of good old-fashioned spotting bar if they're in a power rack? Wouldn't you guys know that a lot better than I do?
Yeah, that's a great point. And I know not everybody's comfortable with that from a coaching or athlete standpoint. I know when I was at Springfield, and that was how we spotted our athletes. People learned to self-spot and use the safety bars. And we had some great lifters there. And that was a really, I think when you're onboarding athletes into your program and you're teaching them landing skills and how to lower a bar that when you're failing without crashing and without injuring yourself, those types of skills that come across in the weight room, I think those are valuable. And it's a time that from a safety standpoint, as soon as you add someone, this works across the board. As soon as you add someone to the platform or the rack, you double the number of things that can go wrong. It's just, and so from a spotting standpoint or from a COVID-19 standpoint, it's going to, that is just something to think about in terms of how you implement spotting with your athletes. So I'm a big fan of that, using the safety bars. I think there's going to be a time and there's a certain amount of weight where I would want to have one spotter or sometimes even 3 spotters there, depending on what I'm lifting. So it might dictate what you do, but early on, I think we're just talking about right now. It's very acute in how we want to put this into practice. So, yeah, I think that's a good recommendation.
Yeah, thank you. And also everyone, on behalf of athletic trainers, thank you so much for all that what you guys do. You guys make our job a lot easier because you keep these young men and women healthy and out of our ATRs. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dale. And I guess sort of as a parting concept, we've talked, a lot of people, I know a lot of people on here, we've talked before about sort of an anchor and tether idea, meaning any policy, any process has to be anchored on a certain set of values, and then sort of the tether or the rope should be let out or pulled back depending on context. That's something we do all the time when we're evaluating kids, context by context, situation by situation. We're doing it all the time. There's just one added variable, I think, well, perhaps 2 at this point. And what's exciting to me is that these people and the ones that we're going to send this off to, because a lot of people wish they could have been here and are excited to see the video, you're the ones to do the job. We've sort of been prepping for this for a long, long time. And that is exciting to me. So this is the work we do. We anchor our concepts, we adapt to the context as needed, and we just keep doing the next right thing. I would say that from what I've seen around the state, that might be the next step for people. What do we want out of June? Can we be explicit about it? What sort of risk are we willing to shoulder? How are we going to get this job done? And then just keep going. I think the best advice that was given to me a long time ago, and I try to share with people, is try it, listen to feedback, adjust. It's not that hard. But again, that process will happen over and over and over, only in the context of the goals we set up for ourselves. So I'm incredibly grateful, not only to everyone who came to speak, but absolutely all of you. I will put this email together. Let's keep this community together. One thing, Eric, we talked about the other day was potentially getting, like why wouldn't we jump on some sort of town hall meeting every so often? Once weeks 1 and 2 are in the books, we could certainly come back and debrief and sort of troubleshoot and share our experiences. That's something you all are interested in.
That's a great idea.
We'll keep this conversation going.
Yeah. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for coming today. And please reach out. A lot of NSCA staff on here, and we support you guys. Joel, thank you. And yeah, everybody have a great night.
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Bye-bye. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Eric, can we save the group chat? Is that a possibility?